Hello, everyone. It's Josiah. Over the past few months, I have been focused mostly on media episodes. In particular, I've been taking a closer look at the cultural products of evangelicalism in America. All of July was focused on Christian music, and the first few Patreon episodes of this month continued to riff on that theme a bit. And while I really enjoyed focusing on those subjects, I want to change gears a bit here. During July, a lot of politics was happening. We wrapped up June with the terrible presidential debate, which would launch a media campaign to push Biden off the ticket. This was followed then by the assassination attempt, the RNC, Trump's VP pick, Kamala becoming the Democratic nominee, and of course, the announcement of Walz as VP pick for the Democrats. Since I didn't get to address much of this, I wanted to do a bit of a punditry episode to catch back up on some news. While I was thinking about this, I happened to read a piece by Jack Mirkinson in The Nation entitled, "A Vibe Shift Won't Save Gaza." I reached out to see if he'd be willing to do a last-minute episode about the past few months of electoral politics, and, well, here we are. If you're not familiar, Jack Mirkinson is the senior editor at The Nation, as well as editor-in-chief at Discourse Blog on Substack. Both are wonderful publications that are well worth your time. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the dramatic vibe shift of the past few months and ask the difficult question. Does this emotional shift actually correlate to any real change, especially for Gaza? Before we dive into the episode, though, I do need to say that you can support this show on Patreon. For $3 a month, you receive 2 or 3 exclusive episodes per month, as well as the occasional short bonus episode or deleted scene from an episode. Recent episodes on the Patreon have included a discussion with my buddy Nate Thiessen about his time playing worship music and performing in Christian bands before eventually leaving evangelicalism, as well as a conversation with my good friend Leo Dickinson that we recorded on a road trip to see the worst of all possible worlds live in Colorado. So check that out. And with that out of the way, let's get on to the episode. You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast about history, politics, faith, media, and the internet, hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. This is episode 41, The Vibe Shift, featuring Jack Mirkinson, where we talk about the last few months of American electoral politics. We are, and I will say welcome everyone to Fruitless. I am joined today by Jack Mirkinson. Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. If somebody's not familiar with you or your work or whatever, do you want to do a brief introduction? Just let everyone know who you are.
Sure. First, thank you for having me on.
Yeah,
I should
absolutely.
have said that 2 seconds ago. I was being impolite. I'm sorry. I am currently a senior editor at The Nation magazine, where I edit and write from time to time. I am also the editor and co-owner of Discourse Blog, which is an independent website on Substack, which you can all subscribe to if you want to, that I run along with 6 of my colleagues. Nice. We're an independent, collectively run leftist news and culture website, and we are powered solely by reader subscriptions. So whenever I get into any venue, I have to take up a little time just to make that pitch. Discourseblog.com. And now my fellow co-owners won't be mad at me.
Yeah, I was taking a look at that earlier, and it's good from the little bit I've read of it. So everyone should check that out. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, I asked you to come on kind of to talk about the vibe shift. There's been a lot of talk about the vibe shift because, I mean, we started this year in, if you were on the left, a pretty depressing situation. There was a real sense that we were doomed. We were stuck going into a Biden admin again, and that it seemed like it was pretty clear he was having visible signs of decline while there is an ongoing genocide in Gaza. And I think that it's been kind of apparent over the past month or so that that weight has lifted off a lot of people's shoulders. And so I kind of wanted to go through that, the kind of like last month or two of politics here, kind of starting with Biden's debate, and kind of get us to the present here, and then kind of start to decide whether we think that vibe shift is a delusion or whether it is worth being optimistic about. So on June 27th, we had the infamous, terrible Biden debate.
Strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death.
Did you? I guess doing a little punditry here. What do you think why was that the moment that it broke? It seemed to break the public consciousness a bit.
I think it wasn't so much necessarily that it changed the public consciousness. Mm-hmm. I think it changed the consciousness of the political class and the media class. Because if you look at the polls, or surveys of, the opinions of the American people over the last couple of years, people in very large numbers have been saying for a long time, Joe Biden, please do not run for president. We don't want you to run for a second term. We think you're too old. We want you to bow out. Now, to be clear, they also said this about Donald Trump. There was widespread enthusiasm for the idea of both of these people not running for president.
People didn't want to do 2020 over again.
Yeah, people did not want to do 2020 over again. People did not want, an 81-year-old going up against a 78-year-old, which is not necessarily prohibitive if you're that old for, making a great contribution to public life, if you want to put it in highfalutin terms. But with these specific people, clearly had started to become something of a problem. But everyone was trapped in this situation, I think, in which, the public had been screaming over and over again, please, can we have anything different than this? And the Democratic Party in response had said, no, you will just have to deal with Joe Biden. And so I think it was this sort of conspiracy of silence, basically.
Yeah.
Coupled with what is now pretty clear, was an actual conspiracy within the White House to hide the extent of Biden's decline. They had been isolating him from people. They had been very, very carefully choreographing any media appearances that he made while heavily restricting those media appearances. So they had been actively trying to shut down all of the stuff about his cognitive state for a long time. And, so the debate was this unbelievable moment where their clear hubris and denial about the state that he was in really came back to haunt them, because it was clear within literally 30 seconds, the second that debate started and he started talking, I certainly went, oh my God. I think
I did
most
the same
people
thing.
Did.
I was watching it with my girlfriend, and it was that first minute, my head just sank into my hands.
Within 1 minute, it was Jesus Christ, what is happening here? Within 2 minutes, it was someone I started thinking someone calling a bomb threat, someone rush onto the stage and tell him he's needed in the Situation Room or something, please make this end. And then, by the next minute, it was, he has to drop out of the race. So I think that, it was so obvious, and it was this sort of it was like everyone had been suddenly granted permission of some kind to have the conversation that had been suppressed for so long. And so I think once that happened, and once he got himself into a situation where he could not avoid the discussion around his just sort of basic capabilities in terms of being the president of the United States, then I think there was just sort of nowhere for him to hide anymore. And the vehemence and the immediacy with which people responded to that, you had like, I think the New York Times either the next morning, like a few hours later, basically, or certainly the day after, you had all of these influential voices saying pretty instantly, like, okay, time to go, get him out, which is kind of an extraordinary thing. Like, the primaries were already over, the convention was about to come, and everyone instantly was like, nope, like, please leave. And so what that showed me was that this is something that all of these people had already been thinking, but for whatever reason had either like been unwilling to say, because of like loyalty to the team, or because they thought there wasn't a point to it because he wasn't going anywhere, or any, explanation you want. But, like his decision to push for that debate early, and remember, it was his idea. To do that. Like, I mean, one of the biggest self-inflicted disasters in American political history, without question. But at the same time, possibly one of the luckiest things that has ever happened to the Democratic Party in terms of giving it an opening to avert what was obviously an impending calamity electorally. They were heading towards not only a wipeout at the presidential level, but Biden was also beginning to drag down Senate races and House races that where the candidates had been running ahead of him by some distance. I mean, every this is why it was so crazy that there was this group of people being like, how can you tell him to leave? Like, he's the best thing we've got. You were seeing, like, in places like Wisconsin or Nevada or Ohio, Biden trailing badly, and meanwhile, like, the Senate candidates in these tough swing states, like winning comfortably in the polls, or leading comfortably in the polls, I should say. So it could not be more obvious that people's problem was specifically about Joe Biden.
Yes.
They did not want him to be the candidate. They did not want him to be the president any longer. And once that conversation was able to be had openly, then I think that is why things proceeded in the way that they did.
Well, and I think that's part of what I think was so surreal about the last couple months, is that I think we've gotten really used to a type of like hyper politics, where we're used to a lot of politics, a lot of it in our lives in the sense of discussion or whatever, but no direct impact that discourse seems to have with the actual political structure. Like, we all weren't happy about Biden, but we weren't expecting anything to change, and I think this is an interesting connection to make with the JD Vance pick, because it kind of feels like the picking Vance as VP for Trump picking Vance as VP came off of that similar cockiness that, like, public perception isn't going to be able to actually affect us anymore. Like, we can just do what we want. That kind of separation between the political structure and even just public sentiment.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. This was, I think the Vance pick was a, like, spiking the football moment for Trump. It came in the midst, obviously, of him almost getting killed. And so, I mean, this is like how crazy this like last little political period has been. Like, Trump almost got assassinated, and like, everybody was like, oh my God, the election's over. Like, this is done. there's no coming back from that. Like the picture of Trump with the flag is like instantly iconic. Everyone's going to be talking about it forever. Like, let's wrap this up and go home. And it was in that sort of frenzy that they decided to go with Vance, and one of the very strange things that's clear from a lot of the reporting around the Trump campaign is that they had a very, very clear strategic plan for how to deal with Biden and how to stoke the narrative, which I should say is an accurate narrative that that his cognitive state is, shall we say, not what it once was. And so like they were executing this plan to, say, look at this guy, like, and sort of stay out of his way, actually, and like, if you looked at Trump in the debate, he was actually very disciplined in that debate. He just lets Biden, sort of destroy himself. He didn't like come in a lot and try to, become the focus of that debate. He let Biden just display everything that voters had been worried about. And so they had this great plan when it came to Biden. But then once the debate happened, from everything that's been reported, they were completely convinced that he wasn't going to go anywhere. They were like, Biden, there's no way they're going to get him out now. It's never happening.
It's way too late. Yeah.
Yeah, it's too late. He's not going to leave. Like, they're never going to push him out. Which on the one hand, like, is not the worst bet to make, given how self-destructive the Democratic Party often can be. And how willing, like, to just sort of jump enthusiastically into the abyss Democrats often are. But but at the same time, like, anyone looking at what was happening should have said, well, maybe, but like, things are pretty crazy right now. We might need a plan B. But instead they apparently planned, just to be able to kind of cruise onto November, and Trump, who, often has better political instincts in a lot of ways than some of the people around him, had actually been a little leery of picking Vance. And then Steve Bannon, Don Trump Jr., Tucker Carlson, they all like
real ideologues, actually, trying to get him in for the most part. Anyway. Yeah.
And also like real, crazy, stupid people, right? Like real, like, people who are like, talk about being in a bubble, people who are just like huffing the craziest fumes of the far right constantly, and so they were like, no, it's gotta be like JD, like, he's the one, he's like the best, like, MAGA candidate. And Trump went with that. And in the moment, like, you watch the RNC, which I unfortunately had to do basically in its entirety. And, like, Trump was like sitting there, like, beaming while everyone was serenading him all the time. Everyone was wearing like ear bandages in homage to him, and so it felt like, okay, here's like this coronation, and JD Vance, like, is like, whatever, but it almost doesn't matter that he's there.
It's all about Trump. Yeah.
Because it's all about Trump. But then, it started to matter. That's the problem.
That's the problem. Yeah.
And they got a completely different race from the one that they had been planning for. And they have not been able thus far to pivot successfully in any way. That's not to say that they won't figure out a way to at least mount a more respectable campaign against Harris and Walz, because, we still have quite a few months to go in this race. But so far, they've been caught completely flat-footed, and Vance has been a complete disaster.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually the RNC was the beginning of the vibe shift for me personally. And it was because I watched the entire RNC also. And by the end, I started to realize that I think this party's not doing as well as it's presenting itself. At the beginning, I was genuinely pretty fucking scared of what the RNC had become, because I mean, not that the RNC was ever a good thing by any means, but like the amount that was focused on Trump just felt so, I don't know, Caesar like, it was really gross. It had a real fascist element to it. But then by the time like the punchline of that entire RNC was Trump coming out and actually speaking and realizing that, oh, right. This is also an elderly man that just had a trauma, getting shot at too. So that's kicking off some degree of decline, it seems now. And it, by the end of the RNC, I just started laughing because the speech was so long and so not going anywhere, that it
was so boring.
It was so boring.
And I spoke to the head of the Taliban. You've heard this story. Abdul, still there, still the head of the Taliban. The press got on me. Why would you speak to him? I said, because that's where the killing is. I don't have to speak to somebody that has nothing to do with it. And I told him, don't ever do that. Don't ever do that again. Don't ever do that again. You've got to stop. Because during the Obama administration, many great people and soldiers, a lot of soldiers were being killed from long distance. I said, if you keep doing that, you're
like,
gonna be
if you somebody like tuned in just mid that speech, like, I wonder how Trump's going to do. I don't think anyone leaves that thinking he looked that great. You could feel the energy dying in the room around it. And then I believe it's that following weekend is then when Biden officially stepped down. And it was like, okay, this is when what felt impossible a month prior was actually happening. Trump doesn't have the juice. It doesn't seem like he's doing well. And now the massive anchor holding down the DNC has finally been let go of.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Biden would have had to drop out one way or another. Like, among other things, Nancy Pelosi was on the case, and like, whatever one thinks of Nancy Pelosi, and I think a great many things, she does not start fights that she doesn't think she can win. So like, I think the people like around her, the party was clearly like, okay, actually, like, we can't accept this, but then I think, like you said, the Trump speech was just this reminder that, like, actually, this is not like Superman. This is not, like, that the rest of us don't actually have to have the same messianic view of Trump that his followers do. I mean, the thing about Trump is he's very good at making even his opponents believe that he has the sort of superhuman gifts that his supporters believe.
He's really good at myth making.
Yeah. And the level, and the level of fear and sort of awe that he's inspired, among even his political rivals has made everyone completely insane for almost 10 years now. Because I think a lot of it is that people are not over 2016, when they just said, well, there's no way that Trump could win a presidential election. And then he did. And they're like, oh, my God, it's because he's a like super genius. But whatever the case, I do think that the speech, which people at the Nation who were there were telling us, like, people are bored as hell in this, like, in the arena, basically. Like, people are just, like, people are like tuning out because he talked for like an hour and a half. He gave the longest convention speech in history. I mean, and like, it was so bad. And it was this moment, like, I wrote about it the next morning on Discourse Blog. Like, it just made me think of the old SNL skit, where George Bush is debating Michael Dukakis. I don't know if you've seen that, and like George Bush like meanders on, like, and says all this like stupid shit, and then Dukakis goes just like, I can't believe I'm losing to this guy.
Well, let me just sum up On track. Stay the course. 1,000 points of light. Stay the course.
Governor Dukakis, rebuttal.
I can't believe I'm losing to this guy.
And I was like, I can't believe they are losing to this person. Like, this is not a person who is impossible to beat in an election. No. This is like a rambling, confused old man who is so deep in like his own universe that he's almost unable to communicate with the outside world beyond like the narrow confines of the MAGA world. And like, this is the person that you're saying, you know, is just on a glide path to getting elected for a second time. The only reason he's on a glide path is because Democrats are currently sticking with the one person who is guaranteed to lose against Donald Trump. Nobody's guaranteed to win against Donald Trump, but Biden was clearly guaranteed to lose. You know, and so I think that was like part of the sort of push that people needed to say, like we can do something with this, but we can't do anything with it while we have Biden around. You know, and so I think it was already clear before that Biden had to go, but that just crystallized like just how much of an opportunity to defeat Trump was being left on the table, you know, and like Joe Biden's own like personal feelings are not enough of a reason to say, well, I guess we have to just lose the election to Donald Trump for the Democratic Party. You know, like they're you know, they wound up having at least that much of a sense of self-preservation, you know, and I think also, you know, like Biden's camp has been straight up like, I don't want to say lying to him about the polls, but they've been in like a polling bubble for months. This has been widely reported that they're like, we don't believe the polls, you know, and he was giving interviews and saying, I don't know, I'm like, it's neck and neck, I'm tied, you know, and people were like, we don't think they're actually like telling him what's happening out there. But I think eventually they started actually doing that a little more. And so the facade that he was behind started to crumble, and he could see a little more and more and more that, oh, actually, like, I am kind of the problem here. You know, so I think it just wound up being this perfect storm that he was unable to withstand, you know, as you know, and that was exactly right. You know, he should not have been running.
No, there should have been a primary a year ago.
Right. You know, like, I mean, he should, at the very least, there should have been a serious primary. But really, you know, in 2020, when these conversations were already happening about his fitness for office. Although if you look back at videos from 2020, it is night and day.
He's like so sharp. He's answering questions. It's crazy.
Yeah, you know, and so like, but
sentences.
In 2020, you know, he said, "Oh, I'm a transition candidate. I'm a bridge," you know, and then all of a sudden he was like, "Well, actually, like, I'm not a bridge.
I'm the guy. Yeah,
like I'm actually, you know, like the fake tunnel." In like a Wile E. Coyote cartoon, and America is, I'm just gonna lead them to smack right into you know, that wall, and you know, their face is gonna get all like smushed up, and then, you know, their noses are gonna go up and down like an accordion or whatever that happens in those cartoons, but like, you know, and so then it was like, wait a minute, what happened to you being like a bridge? What happened to you getting the hell out of the way? You know, and so ultimately, I think he had no choice, you know, and it was crazy what he put everyone through. But, you know, the right thing did eventually happen.
Do you think Biden getting COVID also played a role in this as well, or do you think that played less of a role?
I think it absolutely played a role. You know, I think And again, I think I said this earlier, like ultimately I think they would have just said, this is untenable, because it was. But in terms of when it happened, how long it took to get him out, maybe we're talking about like a week or something like that of difference in how long it took. But I think COVID happening, and this is not entirely fair because anyone can get COVID.
Right, of course.
But it was like, okay, this like 81-year-old, like, who is visibly like totally frail, like can't speak above a whisper anymore, and now he like has
life-threatening illness.
Now he has like that virus that everyone knows is pretty bad. And so it was just a reminder that like his health is very fragile. And also it sidelined him. It made it impossible for him to do, he went on like a big like national like tour through a bunch of swing states, and was like giving trying to show that he was still like energetic and still had his brain fully in his head. So like that had to end. He just had to sit in his house in Delaware and stew. And so then I think it gave him time to like sit and think a little bit. It gave everybody else a little more space to plot against him. And it gave him a moment to like actually talk with his closest people, so I think it absolutely played a role.
And you'd mentioned that, after the debate was the moment when kind of the pundit class and the media, it just did vaguely, and what that was the thing that finally turned on him. Like the public had already been fed up with him. And I think it was about that time, he's got COVID. You have this polling suggesting that Trump is weaker than we thought, that the JD Vance had actually hurt, the Vance pick had actually hurt him, all that. And, it was apparent at this point that the media wasn't going to let up either. Like the New York Times, like, didn't start backpedaling. No one was backpedaling. It seemed like everyone was like, no, we're going to destroy this campaign.
I mean, I think that's accurate. This is one of the rare times, when I found myself like somewhat defending the mainstream media, a position I almost never find myself in, because there's this whole narrative that's spraying up like this is a media creation, like people are wanting to get him out because the New York Times and like CNN or whatever like won't stop talking about it. And it's like, on the one hand, sure, like the New York Times was absolutely relentless in like picking up on every single like even minor gaffe that he made in that period. But that's his fault,
right?
Like he was the one who first insisted on running again when he clearly shouldn't have. And he was the one who set up this debate as a clear test of his cognitive function. That's what it was. I mean, we all knew that's what it was. Everybody tuning into that, nobody expected like the disaster that we all saw, but everyone tuned in like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen here. Nobody was like, oh, it's going to be fine. And like Joe Biden's going to do a great job. And he's definitely not going to like say anything weird. Everyone was just like, okay, something's probably going to happen, but I guess like we'll just see how this goes.
We'll see it. Yeah.
And so like the New York Times did not invent, I think something in February, I think this was an ABC News poll, something like 87% of respondents said, I don't want Joe Biden to run again. Like 87% in the United States in 2024, like to get a political consensus like that is like unheard of, like if Joe Biden said like, oh, in like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and they did a poll about it, 35% of Republicans would probably say, like, I don't know if that's true. You know, like to get 87% of people to agree on something as fundamental as should the current president of the United States run for re-election, you know, like that's not a media creation. That is an organic reaction that people are having to one of the most natural, you know, unfortunate, upsetting, but natural parts of being a human being, you know, of being alive. Like the aging process, the cruelties that aging can inflict on people, the hardship it can bring on their families and their loved ones. Everybody knows about this. Everyone can recognize it. And people, you know, are not stupid. Like people have eyes in their heads and brains in their skulls. And they're like, we know what's happening here. So the idea that like this was something that nobody was thinking, and then the New York Times and you know, cable news and whatever, like put it all in their heads, I just think is nonsensical. You know, like it was Joe Biden putting it in people's heads, because Joe Biden was asking to be entrusted not just to run for re-election in November, but then to serve again for another 4 years, you know, and like whatever people might have thought about his ability to like stagger across the finish line in a few months, like the idea that anyone seriously believed that he was capable of serving until January 20th, 2029, like was farcical. It's what like, obviously that wasn't happening, you know? And so, like in this instance, the media, you know, and within that, I think you can have a critique of the way that these outlets handled certain parts of this conversation, or like, did they overdo some of their reporting? Like, you know, but fundamentally, this was a response to something that was already in the water, you know, and then everyone was like, well, why aren't you focusing on Trump? Like, what about what he's doing? And it's like the reason that people were not focusing on Trump was because the sitting president of the United States, like, had a complete like mental breakdown or cognitive breakdown, I should say, on national television in the most important setting possible, and everyone is freaking the hell out. You know, and so like if you want people to talk about Trump again, take Joe Biden out of the equation, and they will, which is exactly what happened.
Well, and that was something that I was getting really frustrated by the kind of Biden defenders at the time, because it would be like, well, why aren't you worried about Trump? And it's like, the reason people are saying this is that they are worried about Trump. And then we look, and this is supposed to be our savior. We're fucked. Like that was. Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, that like there needs to be some kind of academic study on like the Biden dead enders who popped up in that little moment, because it was like one of the like craziest episodes of like mass psychosis that I think you will ever see, certainly in terms of like American politics, you know, just like, oh, like the reason that Biden is losing is because like you're not trying hard enough to like make people vote for him, you know? And it's like, that's not how it works. Like people are not going to vote for this man. Like we have to accept that as a society, you know? Like this is just like an objective reality, you know, and it's not like because people didn't like want it enough for Joe Biden or whatever. It's because Joe Biden can't do it. He doesn't have it anymore. You know, so yeah, that whole thing was like crazy. Surreal. Although now it's so funny because all of like the like super like hardcore, you know, I think that people started calling it Blue MAGA, which I think is a handy name. Like all the like the most hardcore Blue MAGA people immediately flipped to being like Kamala stands within like 2 seconds. You know, like Biden's wins, that crazy ass account.
Was that the one that became Kamala HQ overnight or something like that?
No, it immediately shifted to Kamala's wins.
That's right.
It was like, okay, like we got our message, like new person, like now, like, you know, it was like, what, you know, that meme, like Joe Biden's not my best friend anymore. Kamala's my new best friend.
Yeah. I kind of respect the message discipline. You know what I mean? Though it's like, all right, this is the new line. Go.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, it's very clarifying about like what those people's roles is. They're like, okay, like, who's the Democrat? Like, okay, I now believe that they have never done anything wrong and never will do anything wrong. Like, just tell me where to point, like, my tweets. You know, so, yeah, I mean, that was, like, wild. You know, the explosion of enthusiasm from many other people was, I think, somewhat less cynical and off-putting.
Yeah.
You know, most people, I think, were just enormously relieved to see Joe Biden out of the race.
I mean, and I'm among those people. You know, I was surprised at the weight off my chest that it was in that initial moment. Like I tend to consider myself pretty cynical about Democratic politicians. And so I didn't kind of expect to feel that as much as I did, but I did. You know, it's like at that moment, I'm like, we have a fighting chance there, you know, and that was, you know, I got pretty tired of the coconut memes and shit like that after about a week or so. But there was a moment when it was like, okay, we're on the right track here. Things are going well. Things can go well. And the dead enders, lost, and that was a surprise.
Right. Yeah. and I think you, were getting at this earlier in our conversation that, you know, part of the reason that like the debate to drop out period was so sort of psychically painful for so many people was that it was such a clear example, people not being listened to, you know, like people were desperate for something to change, for anything to be different. And they were being told, no, like this one guy wants to stay where he is. So, you know, you're going to have to just accept that, you know. And then when Biden like gave that interview with George Stephanopoulos and he was like, well, as long as I feel like I did a good job, like, and I tried my best, then I can live with Donald Trump, you know, becoming the president again, you know. And so like being held hostage in that way, I think was incredibly toxic for so many people, you know. And so when that lifted, it was like, oh, okay, like actually I'm not being like forcibly tugged like to my doom by this like 81-year-old like egomaniac. I'm you know, like there's actually like some alternative path possibly opening up. Maybe this election is not decided already. Maybe there is a way, you know, to block Trump from the White House. Like people, you know, were actually feeling like someone had responded to the situation. In a way that they hadn't been, you know. And so and also people really didn't want Joe Biden to run for president. And so once he stopped running for president, you know, then a ton of people were like, thank God, now I've like have permission to get on board. You know, most people, I mean, I do not count myself among these people, but I think most people, they do not want to be in an antagonistic like relationship with politicians. They want to be able to like support like politicians and then kind of not think about what they're doing most of the time. You know, they don't want to be like holding people's feet to the fire like constantly. They don't want to like be depressed when they think about who's in office, you know. And so Biden like was so weighed down with all of this terrible energy that the second that he was gone, people were like, oh wait, like I don't have I can just be on the team now. I can be on the bandwagon. I can cheer, and I don't have to be embarrassed about voting for the Democratic Party. I don't have to hide that I might vote for Joe Biden from my friends, It was just politically, culturally, socially, emotionally, it was this giant burden that had been lifted from people. And that also, I think, has driven a lot of the sort of crazed euphoria that we've seen ever since Harris replaced Biden.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we're so used to the political establishment having such a degree of inertia that things never change, and then things changed, it seemed.
Right.
To add that asterisk for later. But then, I mean, the last chunk of this, is so we enter that big moment, this big, release, hey, we've might actually have a fighting chance here. And, a lot of this kind of honeymoon moment was with, leading up to the VP pick, the Veepstakes that were kind of happening there. And I saw you had written early on that you had kind of clocked that Walz was going to be the guy. Why do you think that was?
I did not technically clock that he was going to be the guy. My colleague at Discourse Blog, Laffyy Schwartz, shout out Laffyy, who is from Minnesota and lives in Minnesota.
Okay.
He was like, it's going to be Walz. And I was like, if you say so. I wasn't like, that's crazy, but I wasn't like, oh, I totally believe you. And he was like, he is a very popular governor here. He's passed a lot of good legislation. People like him. Yeah. He's a good communicator, blah, 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 blah. And it's going to be him. Laffyy turned out absolutely correct. I think his local exposure to Walz that the rest of us did not have helped him sort of sense something that a lot of people didn't see. And I think Walz used the Veepstakes more effectively than any of his rivals. I mean, the clips of him on cable news, started going around, and it was like, whoa, okay. This guy is able to communicate his ideas in a way that doesn't seem like he's been a politician all his life. And by framing Republicans as weird, which I know is very controversial.
It's true. These guys are just weird. And it's, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club or something. That's what they go at. That's not what people are interested in. Oh, there's something wrong with people when they talk about freedom to be in your bedroom, freedom to be in your exam room, freedom to tell your kids what they can read. That stuff is weird. They come across weird. They seem obsessed with this.
The fascists depend on fear. The fascists depend on us going back. But we're not afraid of weird people.
I think it's been pretty successful.
But it was a very sharp way of reframing the complete sociopath nature of the Republicans. In a way that captured something real. They are weird. These are people who sit around all the time, thinking about children's genitals and and want to ban IVF,
Yeah.
That's very, very
very
out
weird.
there.
Yeah.
That is not where most people are. And so I think he was able to tap into something, and he was and he had the political sense to feel that out there in among the public, that they were looking for some way to be less sort of terrified of Donald Trump, and for a way to be able to reduce the psychic toll that he was taking on everyone. And of course he also benefited from having a much more opaque record when it came to Gaza, which his chief rival, Josh Shapiro, certainly did not.
Yeah.
And he benefited from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party choosing to make blocking Shapiro its primary goal.
Yeah.
In terms of the VP selection, so he was a real beneficiary of that, and it seems like it's been certainly politically a perfectly successful pick thus far. You can't know what's going to happen, but the rollout has been very well done.
Well, and I think him introducing their weird line to Discourse really laid the groundwork for people being like, oh, he's the guy that did that line.
Yes.
And I mean, just watching that, at least on online spaces, that line has just done nothing but worked really well, because there was just the tendency of right-wingers online to respond to being called weird with incredibly weird shit. It was just a good argument. It worked.
And it was, it captured something truthful about the MAGA movement, and like, of course, like, they're very hateful people and like they're very harmful people, but also like, this is crazy shit that they're talking about all the time, and
because it's reframed it as, it's not like pearl clutching in response to it, which has been often the Democrat approach. It's like, that guy that's at the school board meeting yelling about how pornographic of mice and men is.
Right.
Isn't that guy weird?
Yeah.
We all don't like that guy.
Yeah. It's, and like in the moment when that's happening next to you, you're not necessarily like, oh my God, I'm like in fear for my life. You're like, who the hell is this guy? Like, can he just shut up? And I think also it was such a contrast with Biden's approach, which was, like, to just sort of like in a halting whisper, just be like, oh, we're a battle soul of America, democracy, something. And like nobody was listening to that.
No.
Partially because like I think they literally could not hear what Joe Biden was saying at the time. But it was like like that message was not working, and like people were not interested in hearing for the millionth time, like, Donald Trump will like eat every baby in America and like, burn us all to the ground. Among other things, we've already lived through 4 years of Donald Trump, and they weren't good years, obviously, but we're all still here.
Right.
And so I think it's much harder to convince a lot of people after like already having experienced a Trump presidency and, survived it, not necessarily in like the best state, but, like having sort of staggered our way through that, as painful as it was, to then say, oh, well, if it happens this time, then this is really the time when like America is over. I think people have a hard time buying into that, and so to reframe it as like, these people are absolutely nuts, and like, don't you not want to have to deal with them anymore? Because that would be great. It's like, like we've had to be dealing with these people since 2015. It's a long time.
It's almost a decade. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a long time to like have this nonsense, like, dragging, the rest of us around all the time, and so like, the ability to just be like, don't you just want to like get rid of that? Like, they're so stupid. I think is very refreshing to people.
Well, and I think that coupled with then the Republicans overplaying their hand, doing the JD Vance pick and stuff like that, just coupled with it really nicely, because the party was acting weird. And line,
also because JD Vance has like been filmed on television being like
weird shit.
Being like having children, like, if you don't have children, like, you need to go to hell.
Final point I'll make is you go on Twitter, and almost always the people who are most deranged and most psychotic are people who don't have kids at home.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. If you look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children.
Like that wasn't some like obscure thing. He said it on Tucker Carlson.
Right, yeah.
The highest rated show on the highest rated cable news network at the time. Like this was not like, oh, he went on like like the world's most obscure like right-wing podcast. Like he said it on national television, and they were like, that sounds fine to us. Like, come on now.
To cut Social Security and Medicare. He intends to surrender our fight against the climate crisis, and he intends to end the Affordable Care Act. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking.
So that was that kind of tracks through what this vibe shift we've been going through the last couple months. That's the positive, the electoral, that stuff. But part of the reason I had asked you on was a piece you did in The Nation. A vibe shift won't save Gaza. And so I think this is where the subject of Gaza is where I've started to sour on this like kind of honeymoon with this new ticket. And I think there was early signs of that going on when Netanyahu addressed Congress and there were the protests outside, and then Harris denounced the protests outside. I kind of expected that. She was acting within her role as VP. It wasn't too much of a surprise, but it was a bad sign early on. And then there was a pretty haunting little quote you pull from NBC News in that piece that I think might be a good place to start here, which was that a Democratic strategist said to NBC, bringing Gaza back into the foreground would just be awful all the way around. Nobody wanted to return to that. And so there was a degree in which the Walls pick was an attempt to satiate that part of the party, at least on some level or another. And then that piece happened to drop the morning of now the kind of semi-infamous video of a rally in which protesters interrupt Kamala Harris giving a speech, and she replies with her "I'm the one talking right now" kind of line.
Right.
So I guess let's sour the mood here. What are your concerns about this ticket?
Happy to sour the mood. I have been focused on Gaza more than any other single story ever since October 7th. It has been the primary focus of my writing, of my work as an editor. I've been very, very deep into the story about the genocide that has been taking place there. So I'd say that just, to give some context about where I'm coming from, with regards to where we currently find ourselves. I think the Walls pick and Harris's approach to Gaza since she became the candidate, just in general, it's good to see it as a test. It is, like on the one hand, like picking Walls, was a signal to the progressive wing of the party that, that Harris, at the very least, did not want to make them unnecessarily angry. And
potentially that it seemed like a gesture toward a popular front of some sort. Like, hey, maybe we might be doing what happened in the French election here.
Right. And so, like, on the one hand, you can take that as a sign of the strength of the progressive movement, which I think people are totally welcome to do. But also, we are dealing with a candidate and a party that is desperate not to have to deal with the reality of Gaza. And the reality of Gaza is that Israel has been carrying out a genocide against the people of Gaza. They've been doing it now for almost a year, which is insane. Conservatively, like around 40,000 people are dead.
And the real number is likely probably in the six figures.
Yes, the real number is likely considerably higher. And there is a level of suffering and trauma and destruction that I don't think anyone who is not in Gaza even has the capacity to understand. And all of this has happened not only with political, diplomatic, financial support from the government, of which Kamala Harris is currently the second most powerful member, but most importantly, it has been happening using U.S.-made weapons that the Biden administration has been sending without fail to Israel, no matter what has happened, and has been sending on all of our behalf. This is military aid that you, I, every person who pays taxes in this country is helping to pay for. We are funding, all of us, an ongoing genocide, and that is due to the decisions that the Biden administration, including Kamala Harris, have made. And, I understand why people do not want to grapple with that. I understand why people might be unhappy when that truth pushes its way back into the picture. But the truth is the truth. Kamala Harris is the vice president of the United States. She is more powerful than 99.999999% of people currently living on the planet, basically.
Right.
And she is running for president. She is running to lead the United States government and presumably then to lead the response to what is happening in Gaza, or, to lead or to continue to be as complicit, in an administration that she runs herself, as the administration that she's now a part of has been. And so, I am not, I'm not a fan of like voting discourse. I think people get really bogged down in like the single question of like, well, are you voting for her or not? Like my own view about that is like, do what you want. Like, I'm not gonna say to people like, vote for Kamala Harris, don't vote for Kamala Harris. Like, that's sort of not my business. The only thing that I want people to do is to be honest about what they're doing, And so, like, if we are being honest, really actually honest, we will have to admit that Kamala Harris has done virtually nothing to signal that she really, like, actually wants to shift in any significant way from where Biden is on Gaza. She has said some potentially like more palatable things about Gaza, though even that, if you actually look at the words,
similar to what Biden was saying.
Words of their speeches, which I have done, like they are pretty identical, but beyond that, she has not sent any signal that she wants to condition aid to Israel, that she wants to stop this unending flow of weapons to Israel that Israel is using over and over and over again to carry out this genocide, that she wants to restore funding to the UN aid organization that the United States cut funding from based on these completely nonsensical claims that it was like a Hamas cell. She has sent no signal that she intends to take whatever judgment comes from the International Criminal Court against Benjamin Netanyahu seriously. She has sent none of these signals, and instead what she has done is a lot of like nods and winks and very vague like hints that, oh, maybe someday, probably, possibly, she might sort of do something different.
Right.
If you read between the lines of paragraph 17, then you'll find that, oh, maybe she thinks a little, something different, and like, people are going to make whatever calculation they're going to make about their priorities in this election. People don't want Donald Trump to become the president. I don't want Donald Trump to become the president. I think he would be a bad president. But it is one thing for people to say, like, look, I get all that, but XYZ, like, I care about this. I care about that. I don't want to see Trump in the White House. I hate making this decision, but I have to. Or I don't hate making this decision because it's not important. That's not that important to me. It's like, do whatever you want with that. What really gets me is people asking us to look at everything that we have seen, to look at not only the complete fantasy that Harris has represented some major shift on Gaza, which is just not true, and also to pretend that I really do care about this issue, but and I think that like Harris is actually going to do a great job on it. It's like, do what you want, but be honest about the choice that you're making, because whatever people do, whether they vote for Harris or not, they're making that choice against the backdrop of an ongoing genocide that the administration that Kamala Harris is a hugely important part of has been aiding and abetting for almost a year. There's no way around that. People are going to make different calculations about the importance they place on that fact, but it is a fact and we have to deal with it. And the other thing I would say, because I know I've just been monologuing for like 15,000 years. This is what happens when you ask me to talk about Gaza. I get agitated. But, like the other thing is, for people to look at protests against Harris around this issue, the hostility that those protests have generated among so many people, to me, I've sensed this desire by so many people, like that they just want to stop having to pretend like this matters that much to them. And that these protests are shoving an issue that they don't want to care about back into their faces, and like, like people were like, oh my God, look at the way she tilted her head when she like shut down those protesters, and like these people are protesting massive atrocities that Kamala Harris is complicit in, deeply complicit in, and so the idea that it is people's jobs to shut up right now because Kamala Harris has an election to win, I think that I do think is unacceptable. That I do think is just beyond the pale to me. I think, people, it's like, if you want this issue to go away, the way to do that is not to tell people trying to end the genocide to stop trying to do that.
Right.
It is to push as hard as you possibly can for the current United States government, of which Kamala Harris is still the vice president, to actually do something to end it. And so like people in Gaza do not have the luxury of waiting around for our election to play itself out, or for Kamala Harris to like have this little dance with the Palestine movement about where she actually stands on things. People are dying every single day. They're dying from bombs that we are sending them. We are sending to Israel. You know, they're starving. Like it is hell beyond imagination. And so like the moment to deal with this is not some future date when it's comfortable for Kamala Harris. The moment to deal with it is now. You know, so yeah, that, and now I'll shut up.
No, you're good. You're totally fine.
I'm like, you like ask me one question and like 25 minutes later.
Oh, no. I appreciate your thoughts on it. And this is something I've been frustrated with, because there is some truth to saying, well, there's not a ton that can be done in the position of vice president, but also if it's a genocide, there are things.
That's right.
You know, whether it's, yes, she doesn't have the executive ability to do X or Y, but she's able to make a statement. She could say, I denounce my administration's decision to do X and Y.
Yeah,
she could do that.
She could say, listen, like, when I get into office, this is what we're gonna do. You know, like
we're gonna arms embargo, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
This is, you know, she could even say, I mean, like, this would be very like thin gruel, but she could even say, listen, like, nothing is off the table when I get into office. She could send some signal or other, and she has not done any of that.
No,
I mean, at the very least, like, this is a deeply important issue, and she has resisted, just like she's resisted really being like pinned down on any issue. Like we're in such a vibes-based political moment. It is almost entirely divorced from anything that's actually happening in the country or around the world. You know, and so like the idea that she should not have to, at the very least, like sit down and say with some clarity where exactly she stands and what she wants to do about Gaza or about anything else, like, is nuts. Like, she has to lay out what her policy agenda is on this issue. Yeah. She has to tell us, like, what would you do? What do you think?
How are you going to stop this? Because it's being treated as not an urgent issue when it needs to be.
Right.
And I think something I've been really frustrated with over the last week or so, like ever since that ever since her little zinger during that speech.
Yeah.
Is, there are people that are ostensibly on the left who have been denouncing like those protesters. I've been seeing that on, Twitter, where it's like, well, you're going after an ally, you should go after somebody, blah, 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 blah. And I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the strategic thinking is, because people are like, oh, don't alienate Kamala. She might be a potential ally. You don't want to alienate a potential ally. And they say that that's strategic thinking. I don't think that's strategic thinking. I think that the strategic thinking on this and the case for Kamala was always that she is maybe cynical enough to maybe be able to get pressured. So why would we give up the pressure now? That's the whole point.
Great question.
That was what was driving me insane about it, is like, no, I'm thinking strategically here. I'm aware, if Kamala is a potential ally, if she can be pressured, then you need to pressure.
Right.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Like, the protests need to happen.
I saw people being like, Martin Luther King, like, met with Lyndon Johnson. Like, why are you protesting Kamala Harris? It's like, I think Martin Luther King also protested Lyndon Johnson, and JFK quite famously.
This is what's driving me crazy. That example has been the one that drives me crazy too, because that's what the strategic thing to do is to both meet with and try to get concessions from the person and protest and heat up the pressure.
People. I mean, I could go on and on about like the like terrible relationship that so many people have towards politicians. I think like I think like stan culture has like destroyed so many people's brains when it comes to politicians. Like, they are unable to differentiate between like Taylor Swift or like BTS, and
Yeah.
Some of the most powerful people in the universe. You know, it's like Kamala Harris does not. Kamala Harris
your friend.
is not our friend, and she does not need to be like protected from like a couple of protesters. She's the vice president of the United States. Like, she probably could have like anyone killed if she really wanted to. You know, like she has so much more power in her hands than any of us could even contemplate. You know, and so the idea that like we owe her like any sort of deference is completely ridiculous. Like, yeah, we do not work for her. The point is that she's supposed to work for us. Right. You know, and apart from that, I think everybody really loves celebrating protests and social movements long after they are done. Mm-hmm. And people really hate them when they're happening. Yeah. And so I think like, you see that over and over and over and over again, like any movement for social justice, or, any kind of civil rights that you can ever think of, like in the moment, those people have been hated. Martin Luther King was hated. I was thinking of it during the Columbia protests, the 1968 Columbia protests. Yes. So those are good, but these ones, are bad. Yes. I mean, my father was at Columbia in 1968 and helped and helped lead that occupation, and like they were completely vilified, and like they were made into like pariahs by the university, and 50, 60 years later they're like, we love our history of activism. It's like a whole chunk on their website about 68. The suffrage movement, the movement for women's liberation, the AIDS movement, any of these things, any of these movements, the anti-war movements, I could go on and on and on. Like in the moment, people really, really loathe these movements. They are disruptive. They are uncomfortable. They seem radical or extreme, they're challenging like the accepted notions that everyone just like think rule the world, and the reason they're doing that is because that is the point. The point is not to like be quiet and hope that Kamala Harris like does the right thing. It is to create the conditions by which Kamala Harris understands that she has to do the right thing. It is. Yes. And that is the point of any movement, is to push the people who have power to use it in a better way. And you don't do that. You don't do that solely by saying, okay, well, I've been very nice to you and I've made it clear that I won't be mad if you don't listen to me. There has to be some kind of consequence in one way or another for not doing the right thing. And Kamala Harris, as a member of the Biden administration, has very, very, very clearly not been doing the right thing when it comes to Gaza. I would say that was an extreme understatement. And so, like you can like wish that wasn't the case, but the reason those protesters are there is not because they are crazy people or because they want a Donald Trump presidency. It's because there's a genocide happening, and the United States government, of which Kamala Harris is a member, is complicit in it, And so like you want to train your energy like somewhere, train it there. Train it on saying like, what do I have to do to help make this go away, not as like a campaign issue or as an annoyance that like the rest of us have to deal with, but in real life. Like make it actually stop. Yeah. Like, I can think of no better, like, even if you want to get cynically political about it, I can think of no better, like, political, like, event for Kamala Harris to play some part in than ending the genocide, Because then it would be over, and like that is glib in some senses, because the after effects are going to be horrendous for a very long time to come. And like, there's a level of blood that I think will never be able to be washed off of a lot of people's hands. But, when the conflict is over, that would be a huge deal. People would be completely overjoyed that the bombs were not dropping anymore. Israel, which over the weekend bombed, yet another school where innocent people were sheltering, killing dozens of people. There is a picture that is on the photo wires of plastic trash bags carrying the remains of bodies from that bombing. Think about that. Think about how blown apart you have to be for someone to be able to fit your body in a plastic trash bag. Like that is what's happening. And that is what we in the United States are facilitating through our military, economic, political, diplomatic support of Israel, and so, if you want protests to go away, that has to go away.
Then make the bomb stop. Yeah.
People have to, children have to stop being blown apart and and having their remains put in trash bags in Gaza. The famine in Gaza has to stop. The suffering in Gaza has to stop. And until it does, people are going to continue to try and make it stop. And the power to do that does not rest in our hands. Ultimately, it rests in the hands of people like Kamala Harris. And so it is like she has that responsibility. And you don't get to evade that responsibility just because you're running for president, and you don't get to evade it just because the person you're running against is also bad. That's not how it works.
Right. Well, and that was part of the line she had at those protesters is like, if that they want Trump to win. And I think that, again, I'm getting really frustrated at people on the center or people who are opposed to the anti-war, anti-genocide movement here talking about strategic thinking, because I actually don't think they're doing strategic thinking. Like cold electoral analysis, people don't like what's happening in Gaza. I think it would be strategically smart if she wanted to win the election to do something about it.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think, a thing that's just been driving me nuts the last month or so is people, and it's the theme that goes back to even the Biden stepping down question, is a lot of people pressing incredibly unstrategic things at you and saying, this is how you need to be thinking about it strategically.
Yeah. I think that's true. And but in a broader sense, I also think we can sometimes find ourselves, and I include myself in this, somewhat derailed by the strategy conversation. Right. One of my other grand theories of American politics is that being on social media with all of these politicians and pundits who are just sort of opining all day, every day, has made a lot of other people think that it is their function in society to also be a CNN analyst.
Yeah.
And first of all, that's not a job anyone should have. It's hazardous to the public, but also that is not the role that we are all meant to play in this conversation. And I think, on the one hand, of course you're going to have thoughts about what is the best way for things to happen, or what's the best way for people to win an election. And that's obviously important. But I think there is a risk in fixating on that to the exclusion of other things, because it presumes in a way that, just having like a basic sort of like moral outlook and like having basic values about how you want to see the world function, like is somehow at odds with like sound political judgment.
Absolutely.
And like what we know about the way that history moves and the way that change happens is that people who embrace sound morals and concrete values are often able to change the landscape on which the political conversation is happening in the first place. So, I think like you certainly can't like discount like having a strategy at all. Obviously you have to think strategically, but the minute that you start trying to sort of beat like the like soulless like hacks at their own game, like that's when things start to fall apart for me, because you're not going to be able to do it, because you're not engaging in a good faith conversation. You're talking to people who like see no problem in tossing like whole communities overboard if they think that it makes strategic sense, in some broader political framework, and to me, like, you have to have some red lines, that you just carry around with you. You have to have places that you are not comfortable with going, and that you don't think it's acceptable for other people to go. And so I think I think that yes, it is absolutely true that it would be very politically wise in many ways for Harris to be stronger on Gaza. She has voters in places like Michigan and Georgia, and Wisconsin. She has young voters that she's trying to reach. Like, she has all these constituencies that it would be politically astute for her to try to court on this issue, but more importantly, it would be good because she would be helping to end a genocide.
Because it's the right thing to do.
Because it is the right thing to do, and I think we often underestimate the ability that politicians or movements or political actors of any kind have to simply change the terms of debate. Like, we have this idea that, all of these political allegiances are set in stone, that no one will ever change their mind, that the only way to reach anyone is to give in to their own prejudices or biases or anything like that. And I think that completely underestimates the capacity that people have to both adapt to a new political environment and also to be persuaded and to be to be moved by natural human instinct. I think people often do very bad things, but people also do very good things, and people don't want suffering in the world. People don't want children to be blown apart. People don't want, people to be starving. People don't want all of this misery and trauma to be inflicted on other people. And so I think, a huge part of the resonance of the Palestine movement over the past 10 months has been, people who were not focused at all on Palestine before any of this happened, reacting as human beings, saying, it is unbearable what I am looking at on television. It's unbearable what I am passing through on social media. Like, this is not how humanity should be, and so like, I think you have to think strategically, but you have to be able to leave space for people to be able to make a straightforward moral values-based case for the world that they want to see. And a lot of times that job is left to people like the protesters showing up to ask the Vice President of the United States what she's going to do about a genocide that her government is helping to foment.
Absolutely. Well, I honestly think that might be a perfect place to wrap this up here. I think that was a really fantastic ending statement here. So, yeah, I mean, I would throw in just here that I think that you can look at Biden stepping down and the Walz picks as victories for progressives, but more in the sense of dipping our toe into some victories. They are not sufficient. It's not over.
Yeah,
we got a couple things.
Yeah,
and that's it.
And I think it's not over is like a great slogan to just have around your mind in general. You know, like, okay, Biden is out. Great. Josh Shapiro was like overlooked as vice president. Great. Like, I didn't want him to be the vice presidential nominee. I don't think he's like a good politician. So, okay, what's next? Where does that go? You know, where do things go from there? What's the next thing to push for? What is the next goal to have? What is the next, policy change that you want? What is the next fight? There's always another battle to win, and so like, I think just having the mentality of like, okay, the struggle continues, as they say, or as Kamala Harris would say herself, when we fight, we win. So keep fighting and we'll win some more.
Perfect. Well, is there anything you want to plug or anything before we officially wrap up here?
Please read The Nation, thenation.com. Subscribe to The Nation if you can. Subscribe to Discourse Blog. I'll do another shameless plug, discourseblog.com. Subscriptions start at just $8 a month. I promise you it is worth your money. We also write a lot about birds if people are interested in birds. Read those two excellent publications and keep fighting.
Hell yeah. And I will throw in the show notes, Vibe Shift Won't Save Gaza, as well as a piece from Jack here from back in May. This is How Power Protects Itself, which was very good. So, all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was a very, very cathartic conversation.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, make sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps out with the algorithm. And check out the back catalog if you're new. If you really liked the show, consider supporting the show on Patreon. And hey, speaking of that, one of the benefits of the Patreon is that you get your name read out at the end of every episode. So let's do that. This show is brought to you by our lovely patrons, who include, I am once again, Leo Zachary Dickinson, Philip Cozy, I Drink Corn Syrup, Yum. Here, James, I'll say that without the music here real quick, so you can just have that nice little clip. I Drink Corn Syrup, Yum. Aaron Thompson, Attention Francis, Derek Hale, Gavin Aronson, Joseph Gross, Kyle Gannis, Metric Conversion, Moss, Nathan Thiessen, Racecar, Regular Sized Horse parentheses, Small, Robert Heilman, Stephen aka Spike Stonehand, The Blurst of Times, The Worst of All Possible Worlds, Vicky Sutton, and of course, Chris Barker. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you later.